What's up guys, I'm Jesse from Mole and the Maker, and today we're gonna build some floating shelves. Well, not really floating shelves, but shelves that are attached to the wall with some metal brackets that I'm gonna weld up. Now, I'm not very good at welding. I'm actually very new to it. This will probably be, I believe my third project welding. It's a lot of fun. It's a huge learning curve. I'm gonna show you some basic mistakes. If you're beginning welding, this is a good project to try out. To kind of get some of those kinks out of your process, and I'm going to show you some of the mistakes I made. Now subscribe below, make sure that you follow the channel, go watch the other videos, make sure you go to my website. There's a bunch of free plans on there for a bunch of DIY projects, so make sure you check that out. Now let's get into the build. You're gonna start by cutting the long pieces for the shelf. Now I wanted my shelf to be about 4 feet in length. It's gonna go up on the wall in our bedroom with a laundry basket underneath. So knowing the height of my wall and everything and the gap that we wanted to put decorations and books, 4 feet's a good length for us. Now for this project, I'm using a square tubing. It's not very thick. I believe it's about 16 gauge tubing, and it's going to be really easy to weld up. I'm using an ESAB Rebel 215 on the SMIG or Smart MIG setting. Makes it extremely easy to weld up, especially if you're a beginner, because it does most of the math, most of the issues that you have to deal with on a normal one. It already calculates that in. All you have to do is select the thickness of your piece that you're welding. So we're gonna start by cutting some of this tubing on my cutting wheel, and we're gonna cut the 2 4-foot lengths first. Now this will be the length that you actually see, or the pieces that you see most, because that's gonna be in front of the wooden shelves. So we're gonna start by taking some of this tubing over to my cutting wheel and actually cutting it at a 45-degree angle. Now you wanna cut it at a miter, because if you don't miter the ends, you're gonna have an open gap on the top and bottom, and you don't want that, right? You want it to look smooth. You want it to look like one piece going from the wall out to the main 4-foot section. So I cut it on my cutting wheel. I made sure both of them were perfectly the same length. Then it was time to move over to the actual cross beams that will be attaching to the wall. You're gonna start by cutting the top and the bottom cross braces. Those need to be mitered and attached to the long 4-foot pieces. Now they need to be mitered because you're gonna put them together and weld around and then grind it off so it's actually one solid piece. So you start by there measuring the distance from the wall and how wide you want your shelf to the inside of that long piece, cut the miter, and they're ready to go. So you're gonna need 4 of those, 2 for each side. Now I need 4 cross braces for the middle shelves. So I'm gonna start by cutting those. Those don't need to be mitered, they just need to be squared off. So I actually set up a little jig with 2 pieces of wood, just brad nail them together, clamped them to my table. So I used that as a reference point, so all 4 of those that I cut were the exact same length. Once all the pieces were cut, it was time to go through with my grinder and just clean up all the edges. Before you start welding, you want to make sure it's all a clean edge. It just makes it a lot easier to weld and get a better weld. Not that my welds are super clean or good to start out with anyways, as you will see when I start welding, but you do want to make sure that all those burrs and everything like that is completely cleaned off. Now it's time to actually start welding. Like I said earlier, I'm using my ESAB Rebel on the SMIG setting, and we're going to start by attaching the mitered top and the mitered bottom to those 4-foot pieces. Now I used a small square magnet to hold them in place and clamp them to my table so I knew they wouldn't move. Now I went through and just welded each side. One thing that you should do is tack each side before actually doing the full weld, because if you overheat that metal, it's going to start to bow your piece. Now you'll see in a minute that I did this to the middle shelves and it gave me a huge issue. So make sure you tack your welds, make sure they're in place, it's holding that piece together, then go through and finish the welds. Now that the top and bottom are welded together, it's time to move on to the middle brackets. Now you want to make sure that you tack weld those just like I said earlier, but one tip I got on Instagram that I didn't do in this video but I will be doing moving forward is actually tack welding the corners. A lot of beginners like myself, if you watch the video, you can see that I actually don't go all the way to the corner a lot of the time because I don't want to go past, which leaves it so I have to actually go back and re-tack all those corners or finish the welds on all those corners. So if you actually tack the corners, then you can just go to the end of each weld and each tack, which makes it a better weld. So now that both metal shelf supports are done, I wanted to make sure they were squared, and one wasn't. Not even close, actually. The middle, since I didn't tack weld on one of them, they were completely shifted off from the front miter and the back miter, which totally screws up the whole shelf, right? You're gonna be able to see that. It's not gonna look good. So what I decided to do was actually grind down my weld and be able to bend that back. And once that was in place, I tack welded it, let it, solidify, and then I went through and I re-welded that entire area and fixed the issue. But make sure you're using your tack welds before you completely weld those up. Now that I know they're all squared, it's time to just grind, clean it up, make it look pretty. So you might be wondering how we're gonna actually mount it to the wall. Well, I'm going to cut a little piece of flat bar and drill a hole in it on my drill press. Once those pieces are cut, we'll drill the hole and then we'll take them over and we're going to weld them to the back side of those brackets that will be attached to the wall. Now we're gonna put the bracket and the hole on the top side and not the bottom side. The reason being, if it's on the top side of the square tubing, when the shelf sits on top of those supports, it'll actually cover up where we're attaching it to the wall and it'll look a lot cleaner. Once those little pieces are welded on and cleaned up, it's time to use some primer and paint and get these things looking real nice. Well, that's it for all the welding part. Now it's time to move on to building the shelves. I'm using some 4/4 inch hickory and going to glue up these panels. It's gonna be real simple, glue them up. We're gonna keep everything looking real square. And so there's not really a hard process to this at all. So we're gonna start by taking that hickory over to my miter saw, rough cutting it there, taking it over to my joiner, then my planer, then my table saw to get them dimensionally right, then finishing it off on my cruiser, making sure they're completely square on both sides. Once that's done, it's time for sanding and finish. That's pretty much it. So now all that's left is to attach it to the wall. I made sure it was square with my level. I attached it one side to the wall, measured out, and then attached the other one to the wall. After I got the other bracket attached to the wall, I realized that it actually was bowed in a little bit. Once we got it into the studs and everything, for some reason, it was just a little bit off. So what we decided to do, instead of just laying the wood panels on there and being able to kind of see that, because when you build something, you always see that little mistake if you have it. So we wanted to fix that. So what we did was we actually attached the wood to the metal brackets from underneath, drilled out the holes, attached it with screws on the straight side, the side that was square with the wall. Then we actually bowed out that second piece, attached it to the bottom on the other one, and it made it perfectly square. And it looks really, really good. This was a really fun project. I really enjoyed the process. The welding part of it is a lot of fun. It's something that's completely new for me. If welding's new for you or you're thinking about getting into welding, this is a really good project to start on. It's easy to correct any mistakes that you do make, because you will make some mistakes. And I'm glad that I was able to realize what I did, be able to fix it, and hopefully I won't be doing that next time. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Check out the other videos I have. Check out my website, along with following me on Instagram for daily content. If you guys have any questions, comments, or tips for me for welding, make sure you shoot them down below. I'd love to hear them. Until next time, see ya.